Dust settled on the widow's porch as the men dumped the Apache warrior at her doorstep, their cruel laughter fading into the desert wind. Sarah Winters stared at the broken man, his proud spirit trapped in a body that refused to move below the shoulders. The settlement folks thought they'd burdened her with another mouth to feed, a final joke at the expense of a woman already struggling to survive on barren land. But as moonlight spilled across her cabin floor that night, she glimpsed something in his obsidian eyes, not defeat, but a flame refusing to die. With calloused hands that knew both tenderness and toil, she reached for her grandmother's book of healing ways. Could an outcast widow and a paralyzed warrior from enemy worlds possibly forge something beautiful from such cruelty? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Winters twisted her wedding ring, a tarnished gold band that hung loose on her thinned finger. 3 years in the Arizona territory had stripped away everything, her husband, her dreams, her softness. Still, she refused to remove that circle of gold, the last reminder of Thomas and the life they'd planned to build. Dawn stretched pink fingers across the harsh landscape as Sarah filled her water bucket at the creek. Her small homestead, 30 acres of mostly stubborn earth, lay a quarter-mile up the slope, a rough cabin and struggling garden barely visible against the sun-bleached horizon. The creek was running lower this season, one more worry to add to her growing collection. "You're up early, Mrs. Winters," called a voice from the bend. Sarah straightened, pressing a hand against her aching back. "Morning, Doc Wilson. Thought I might get the watering done before the heat sets in." The aging physician nodded, his kind eyes the only ones in Copper Springs settlement that didn't regard her with suspicion or pity. Smart thinking, supposed to be another scorcher today. Doc Wilson was one of her few allies, along with Abigail from the general store. The rest of the settlement kept their distance, some from respect for her grief, others from distrust of a woman who spoke her mind and kept to herself. "How's that cough?" he asked, dismounting from his mule. "Better with that tonic you suggested. Added some of the red clover that grows up by the ridge. Seemed to help." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Your own addition, eh? You've got a knack for the healing arts, Sarah. Shame to see it wasted out here on this patch of dirt." Sarah lifted the heavy bucket. "This patch of dirt is all I have left of Thomas. He believed it would yield, given time and care. And you? What do you believe?" She looked toward her struggling homestead. "I believe in keeping promises, Doc, even the ones that break your back." Thomas had brought her west with dreams of prosperity. Land that would yield crops to sell. Enough. Money to start a family. 8 months after arriving, fever took him, leaving Sarah alone with a half-built life and neighbors who'd never quite accepted the Eastern-educated woman with her books and opinions. "Well, speaking of backs," Doc said, taking the bucket from her, "let me carry this. I'm headed your way anyhow." As they walked, he filled her in on settlement news. A new family arriving from Tennessee. Plans for expanding the church. Concerns about Apache activity to the south. Sarah listened quietly, knowing her thoughts on the latter would not be welcome. "There's a town meeting tonight," Doc mentioned casually, "about the Apache situation. Might be good for you to attend. Show your face," Sarah sighed. "Last time I attended a town meeting, Jeremiah Cooper suggested I'd be better off returning east to find another husband rather than trying to play farmer out here." "Cooper's an ass," Doc said bluntly, "but isolation doesn't help your standing." "Sarah." At her cabin, Sarah took the bucket with a grateful nod. "I'll think about it." Later that evening, against her better judgment, Sarah found herself in the back row of the settlement's small church, which doubled as a meeting hall. Mayor Blackwood, a former army captain with a chest that strained his suspenders, stood at the pulpit discussing the Apache problem. 3 ranches hit in the past month, he proclaimed, slapping a map on the lectern. Cattle driven off, a barn burned, and young Jenkins left with an arrow through his shoulder. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marshal Reeves believes they're testing our defenses, looking for weakness before a larger raid. Sarah bit her lip, knowing she should stay silent, but the words escaped before wisdom could contain them. Has anyone confirmed these were Apache? Raids? The treaty line runs 20 miles south, and Chief Nota has been keeping his people east of Mrs. Winters, Blackwood cut in. I wasn't aware you'd become an expert on Indian affairs. Laughter rumbled through the room. I simply read the territorial newspapers, she replied evenly. And the treaty terms were published. Treaties, spat Cooper from the front row, worth less than the paper they're printed on. You think savages understand property lines drawn on maps by men in Washington? Sarah held her ground. I think they understand very well when their hunting grounds are taken. Perhaps, interrupted Blackwood, you should concern yourself with your own failing homestead, Mrs. Winters, and leave matters of security to those equipped to handle them. More laughter, crueler this time. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her spine straight, the way her father had taught her during debates in his Philadelphia study. The memory seemed from another lifetime. She became aware of Doc Wilson's hand on her arm, a gentle warning. She'd made her point, futile as it was. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of angry voices and plans for increased patrols. As people filed out, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. Thomas Winters must be rolling in his grave, filling her head with book learning instead of practical sense. Won't last another winter out there alone. Only Abigail nodded to her as she passed, a small gesture of solidarity in a room full of judgment. Outside, the night air cooled Sarah's flushed face. She untethered her horse from the hitching post, eager to return to the solitude of her homestead. However failing it might be, Mrs. Winters. She turned to find Mayor Blackwood approaching, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. You spoke out of turn tonight. Sarah tightened her grip on the reins. I spoke what I believe to be true, Mayor. Truth is a luxury out here, he said, lowering his voice. What matters is survival. These people are scared, and fear makes for poor decisions. Your educated opinions don't help. And what would help in your estimation? Blackwood sighed, suddenly looking older. Conformity, Mrs. Winters, at least in public. These are simple people trying to build something in a harsh land. They don't need complications, and I'm a complication. A woman alone, running a homestead, challenging men at town meetings. Yes, you're a complication. He paused. Thomas was well liked. His memory has afforded you certain allowances, but patience wears thin. With that, he tipped his hat and left her standing in the darkness, the implicit threat hanging in the air like the scent of coming rain. Sarah woke to pounding at her door 3 days after the town meeting. Morning light had barely touched the eastern hills as she wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and reached for the shotgun Thomas had taught her to use, but she'd never had the heart to fire. Who's there? She called, voice steadier than her hands. Open up, Widow Winters. The slurred command belonged to Jeremiah Cooper. Got a gift for you? Male laughter, several men then, greeted this announcement. Sarah's stomach knotted with dread. It's barely dawn, Mr. Cooper. Come back at a decent hour. Now don't be unfriendly. We brought you some help for that failing farm of yours. More laughter, cruder this time. Keeping the shotgun close, Sarah unlatched the door but didn't open it. I don't need help, especially not from men who've been drinking all night. Oh, but this is special help. Cooper's voice held malicious glee. Army didn't want him anymore, so we figured a woman with opinions on Indians might appreciate him. Sarah steeled herself and opened the door a crack. Cooper stood on her porch, flanked by 4 other men from town, all red-faced from liquor and cruel anticipation. Behind them, slumped in a crude travois, dragged by Cooper's horse, lay a man, an Apache man. His long black hair was matted with dirt and blood. His copper skin, stretched taut over proud cheekbones, was marked with bruises. His limbs lay at unnatural angles, unmoving. What have you done? Sarah whispered. Cooper grinned. Not us. Found him at the army outpost south of here. Scout who? Got his back broke in a skirmish. Captain said they were waiting for him to die, but it's been 2 weeks, and the stubborn devil keeps breathing. We figured since you're so concerned with Apache welfare, you might want to nurse him yourself. Sarah pushed past them to kneel beside the travois. The Apache's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Up close, she could see older scars mixed with fresh wounds, evidence of a hard life even before his current state. This is inhumane, she said, checking for a pulse at his neck. It fluttered weakly against her fingers. He needs a doctor. Doc Wilson already refused to waste medicine on him, one of the other men said. Said if the army surgeons couldn't help, nothing could be done. So what's your plan? Sarah demanded, rising to face them. Leave him to die on my doorstep as some sort of cruel joke? Cooper's grin widened. Well, you're always talking about how we should treat the Apache better. Here's your chance to practice what you preach. One of the other men, younger and clearly uncomfortable, shifted. Jeremiah, maybe we should just take him back and waste the trip. Besides, widows all alone out here could use the company. Cooper winked, and the others, except the younger man, laughed. Before Sarah could respond, Cooper nodded to his companions. They lifted the travois and unceremoniously dumped the Apache warrior onto her porch. The injured man made no sound, though a flash of pain crossed his face. There you go, Mrs. Winters, your very own Apache brave, though not so brave anymore, I reckon. Cooper mounted his horse. Here they make good servants if you can train 'em. Of course, this one can't move his legs, so he won't be much help with chores. The men rode off laughing, all except the younger one who couldn't meet her eyes. Sarah stood on her porch, shotgun forgotten at her side, staring at the broken body before her. For a moment, she considered running to fetch Doc Wilson anyway, but she knew the truth in what they'd said. If army doctors couldn't help, what could a frontier physician do? Besides, dragging the injured man to town would only subject him to more cruelty and humiliation. The Apache's eyes suddenly opened, obsidian black and filled with such intense dignity that Sarah took an involuntary step back. Those eyes held no plea for help, no gratitude for her concern, only a warrior's pride and the expectation of an honorable death. I don't know if you understand me, she said softly, but I won't harm you. No response, just that unwavering stare. With a sigh, Sarah set down her shotgun and retrieved her grandmother's journal from its place of honor on the small bookshelf Thomas had built. The leather-bound book contained generations of healing wisdom, passed down through her mother's line, remedies from the old country mixed with knowledge gleaned from encounters with indigenous peoples across the expanding frontier. Her grandmother had been a midwife and healer in Kentucky, learning from Cherokee women before they were forced westward. The journal was Sarah's most precious possession, filled with careful drawings of plants and detailed instructions for tinctures, poultices, and healing broths. She flipped through the yellowed pages until she found the section on injuries. There, among notes on broken bones and wound care, was a brief entry on spine injuries. Immobility following back injury may improve with time and proper care. Heat, special poultices, and movement of limbs to prevent stiffening. Sore trappers crushed. By trees walk again after months of such treatment. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah tucked the journal under her arm and approached the Apache man again. I need to get you inside. This will likely hurt. For the first time, an emotion other than stoic pride crossed his face. Surprise. Perhaps that she would attempt to move him alone. Sarah was small-boned but strong from years of farm work. Still, it took all her strength to drag him over the threshold, his body rigid with pain he refused to voice. Inside, she arranged blankets near the fireplace, creating a pallet where she could tend to him. As she worked, memories surfaced of another sickbed, Thomas shivering with fever despite the summer heat, his once strong body wasting away as she watched helplessly. Not again, she murmured. more to herself than her unwilling guest. "I won't watch another man die under this roof if I can help it." The Apache's eyes had closed again, either from pain or exhaustion. Sarah heated water and found clean cloths, then began the delicate task of washing away blood and dirt to assess his wounds. His upper body was lean but muscular, marked with the scars of a warrior's life. When she reached his lower back, she found the source of his paralysis, a deep, partially healed wound near his spine, likely from a bullet or blade that had struck bone. As she cleaned, she spoke softly, explaining what she was doing, though she doubted he understood. "I'm going to try some poultices from my grandmother's book. I can't promise they'll help, but they won't hurt." Throughout her ministrations, he remained silent and still, but his eyes, when open, followed her every move with the intensity of a hawk tracking prey. It unnerved her, that unwavering gaze, but she continued her work with determined efficiency. Night had fallen by the time Sarah finished cleaning and bandaging his wounds and applying the first poultice of yarrow and comfrey to his damaged spine. She covered him with a blanket, built up the fire, and sat in Thomas's old rocking chair, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. "I don't even know your name," she said to the silent figure on her floor, "or if you have family searching for you." No response came, of course. Sarah sighed and opened her grandmother's journal again, seeking any additional wisdom for the impossible task before her. As she read by firelight, she became aware of a change in the Apache's breathing. The rhythm of sleep had replaced the shallow panting of pain. A small victory, but she would take it. In the days that followed, Sarah established a routine. Each morning she changed bandages and applied fresh poultices, then positioned the Apache man to prevent bed sores, a condition her grandmother's journal warned could be deadly for those who couldn't move. She spoke constantly as she worked, partly to fill the silence and partly in hopes that some of her words might be understood. She learned he could move his arms, though weakly, and had some feeling in his shoulders and upper chest. Below that, nothing seemed to register, neither pain nor pressure nor the heat of the poultices she applied. He refused food for the first day, turning his head away from the broth she offered. By the second day, pragmatism apparently overcame pride, and he allowed her to feed him, though his eyes burned with humiliation at each spoonful he accepted. Sarah tried to offer dignity where she could, devising a system of ropes and pulleys that allowed him to signal when he needed the chamber pot she'd placed within his reach. Such intimate care for a stranger, a male stranger from a culture her neighbors feared and hated, should have been uncomfortable, but Sarah approached it with the same practical efficiency she'd applied to farming and survival. On the fourth day, she attempted communication beyond one-sided chatter. "I need to call you something," she said as she changed his bandages. "I'm Sarah Winters." She touched her chest, then gestured to him with a questioning look. For a long moment, she thought he would maintain his silence. Then in a voice rough from disuse, "Takoda." The single word seemed to cost him great effort, but Sarah couldn't contain her smile. "Takoda," she repeated, likely mispronouncing it. "Does that have a meaning?" He studied her face, perhaps assessing whether her interest was genuine or merely another form of settler curiosity about savages. Finally, he spoke again. "Friend to all." The irony hung in the air between them. This warrior with "friend to all" as his name, lying paralyzed in an enemy's home, brought there as a cruel joke. Sarah didn't comment on it, simply nodding. "Thank you for telling me, Takoda. I'll try to be worthy of that meaning." Something shifted in his obsidian gaze. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps a willingness to consider that this white woman might be different from those who had treated him as less than human. It was a beginning. 1 week after Takoda's arrival, Sarah found him fingering a small leather pouch that hung around his neck. She'd noticed it during her ministrations, but had respected it as personal, something the men who'd brought him hadn't thought to steal. Now, as morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, she saw him open it with weakened but deliberate fingers. "Is that important to you?" she asked, setting down the basin of water she'd brought for his morning washing. Dakota's eyes flicked to her, then back to the pouch. From it, he withdrew a small eagle feather, a polished stone, and what appeared to be a dried herb bundle. His expression as he gazed at these items was the most vulnerable she'd seen. A man reconnecting with his identity. "Medicine," he said, simply touching the herb bundle. Sarah moved closer, curious but careful not to intrude. "For healing?" Dakota nodded. "Spirit medicine." He touched the feather and stone. "Protection, strength." His English was broken but effective, learned during his time as a scout, may I? Sarah gestured to the herb bundle. Her healer's curiosity piqued. After a moment's hesitation, Dakota held it out. Sarah examined it without touching. A mix of sage, what might be cedar, and other plants she didn't recognize, bound with sinew. "I have medicines too," she said, retrieving her grandmother's journal. "Different, but perhaps we could learn from each other." Something flickered in Dakota's eyes. Interest, perhaps. Sarah took it as encouragement. "The poultice I've been using," she explained, showing him a page with a detailed drawing of yarrow. "My grandmother learned it from Cherokee healers before they were pushed west." "You learn from the people." Surprise colored his voice. "My grandmother did. She believed wisdom could be found everywhere if one was humble enough to look." Sarah smiled faintly. "Not a common view among settlers, I admit." Dakota studied her face, seeming to reassess his unwilling caretaker. Finally, he carefully returned his sacred items to the medicine pouch and secured it around his neck. "Your husband," he said unexpectedly. "Where?" The blunt question caught Sarah off guard. "Thomas is buried on the ridge," she answered, gesturing. "Eastward. Fever took him 3 years ago." Dakota nodded slowly. "Why stay? Land is poor." It was the most he'd spoken at once, and Sarah took a moment before answering. "It was our dream. His dream, really. I promised him I'd make it work." She shrugged. "Promises matter to me, even to the dead, especially to the dead." She busied herself preparing his morning washing. "They can't release you from your word." Dakota watched her work, his expression unreadable. When she began to wash his chest and arms, a daily ritual that had become matter-of-fact for her, but remained a humiliation for him, he surprised her again. "I will do." He gestured to the cloth. Sarah hesitated. His arms were still weak, but the determination in his eyes was clear. She handed him the cloth and moved back, allowing him this small reclamation of dignity. His movements were slow and sometimes faltering, but he managed to wash his upper body. Sarah noticed how he avoided looking at his unresponsive legs, focusing instead on the parts of himself he could still control. "How did it happen?" she asked quietly. "Your injury." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Army scouts, I guide them." His face hardened. "Ambush, not Apache, renegades from many tribes. Shot here." He touched the back of his neck. "Woke up in army camp. No feeling, no walking. And they just gave up on you." Dakota's laugh held no humor. "Broken scout, no use." He met her eyes directly. "Like broken widow, no use." The parallel struck Sarah like a physical blow. Is that how he saw her? How everyone saw her? A broken thing, clinging to a failing dream out of stubborn pride. "I'm not broken," she said more sharply than intended. "No." His gaze traveled around the small cabin, the patched roof, the meager provisions, the single chair. "This life breaks you slowly. No one to see." Sarah took the cloth from him with more force than necessary. "You don't know me, Dakota, or what I'm capable of." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Show me, then." The challenge hung between them, unexpected and strangely invigorating. Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. "Mrs. Winters, it's Doc Wilson." Sarah smoothed her apron and hair before opening the door. The elderly physician stood on her porch, medical bag in hand, expression grim. "May I come in?" Sarah stepped back, allowing him entry. Doc Wilson removed his hat, then stopped short at the sight of Dakota, now propped against the wall, watching the newcomer. With wary eyes. "So it's true," the doctor said quietly. "Cooper wasn't just running his mouth at the saloon." "Were you hoping it wasn't?" Sarah asked. Doc Wilson sighed. "I was hoping they'd exaggerated. Mind if I examine him?" "That depends." Sarah crossed her arms. "Are you here as a doctor or as the settlement's conscience?" "Both, likely." He set his bag down. "The settlement's in an uproar, Sarah, housing an Apache, even a crippled one, after the recent raids." "Has anyone confirmed those were Apache raids?" she challenged, echoing her question from the town meeting. "Doesn't matter what I think. Perception becomes reality out here." He glanced at Dakota. "Does he understand us?" "Well enough," Sarah said. "And he has a name. Dakota." Doc Wilson approached slowly, hands visible in a gesture of peace. "I'd like to examine you, Dakota." "May I?" Dakota's eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to the doctor. He gave a single nod. The examination was thorough, but respectful. Doc Wilson tested reflexes, checked the healing wound at Dakota's spine, and assessed the movement and sensation in his limbs. Throughout, he maintained a professional demeanor, speaking directly to Dakota rather than about him to Sarah. "The spinal cord is damaged," he finally concluded, packing away his instruments. "But not completely severed, or he'd have no upper body function at all. The army surgeons were correct that medicine can't repair such damage." Sarah's heart sank, though she'd expected as much. "So, there's no hope?" "I didn't say that." Doc Wilson scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I've seen cases where some function returned over time. The body has remarkable healing capabilities, given proper care and enough time." "What kind of care?" Sarah asked. "Keep him clean, prevent bed sores, exercise the limbs to prevent atrophy." He gestured to the poultice visible beneath Dakota's bandages. "Your grandmother's remedy?" Sarah nodded. "It won't hurt and might help with inflammation." He turned to Dakota. "You were an Army scout?" "Yes." Dakota's face remained impassive. Then, "You're owed better than being dropped on a widow's doorstep as a joke." Doc Wilson's voice held genuine anger. "I'll speak to the mayor about—" "No." Both Sarah and Dakota spoke simultaneously. Doc Wilson looked between them, surprised. "You want to stay here?" he asked Dakota. After a moment, Dakota nodded. "For now." Sarah felt equally surprised but hid it. "We've established a routine," she said, as if that explained everything. The doctor sighed. "Sarah, you need to understand what you're taking on. The settlement already views you as an outsider. This will only isolate you further." "I'm already isolated," she replied evenly, "and I've started treatments from my grandmother's journal. I'd like to see them through." Doc Wilson studied her, then shook his head with a rueful smile. "Thomas always said you had more grit than sense. I'm beginning to see what he meant." He closed his bag. "I'll bring supplies when I can, basic medicines, bandages. But keep this quiet. I have other patients to consider." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. At the door, Doc Wilson turned back. "The yucca that grows on the western slope? The roots make a poultice that might help with nerve pain. My wife learned it from a Mexican curandera years back." He nodded to Dakota. "Good luck to you both. You'll need it." After he left, silence filled the cabin. Sarah busied herself with preparing the midday meal, aware of Dakota watching her. "Why?" he finally asked. Sarah looked up from the stew pot. "Why what? Why help enemy? Risk everything?" She considered the question seriously. "You're not my enemy, Dakota. You never did me harm." "Apache," he said, as if that explained everything. "A man," she countered, "who was treated cruelly and left at my door. That's all I need to know." Dakota's eyes narrowed. "Not all. You need seeds for planting, repairs for roof, money for taxes. I bring nothing but trouble." Sarah was startled by his assessment, both its accuracy and the fact that he'd observed so much while lying helpless on her floor. "Perhaps," she admitted. But turning you away would cost something I can't afford to lose. What? The last piece. Of myself I recognize. She stirred the stew with more force than necessary. Everything else has been stripped away since coming west. Comfort, security, Thomas, respect. But I still get to decide what kind of person I am. Dakota was silent for so long that Sarah thought the conversation finished. Then, quietly, "Honor?" She looked up. "You speak of honor," he clarified. "Apache understand this." He touched his medicine pouch. "Honor costs much, worth much." Something passed between them then. Not friendship, not yet, but recognition. Two people clinging to dignity and principle in circumstances that invited surrender. The next morning, Sarah found a crude map scratched in the dirt floor beside Dakota's pallet. He pointed to various marks. "Yucca," he said, "good roots here." He indicated other marks. "These plants, good for healing. I can tell you where. How to prepare." Sarah knelt beside the map, hope flickering to life. "You'd share your knowledge?" Dakota's face remained stoic, but something softened in his eyes. "Trade. You teach reading." He nodded toward her small bookshelf. Sarah smiled, her first genuine smile in longer than she could remember. "Deal." Word spread quickly through the settlement that Sarah Winters was not only housing an Apache warrior, but actively nursing him. And back to health. The reactions were predictable. Outrage, disgust, and a new level of ostracism. When Sarah rode into town for supplies the following week, conversations halted as she passed. At the general store, Abigail greeted her with worried eyes. "They're saying terrible things, Sarah," she whispered as she filled the order. "That you've gone native, that you're—" She couldn't finish. "That I'm what?" Sarah prompted, though she could guess. Abigail flushed. "That you're keeping him for immoral purposes." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. "He can't move, Abigail. He's a patient, not a—" She shook her head. "People will believe what they want to believe. Cooper and his friends have a betting pool," Abigail continued reluctantly, "on how long before you dispose of your problem. Longest bet is 2 weeks. Then they'll all lose," Sarah said calmly, though anger burned in her chest. "He has a name, Dakota, and he's a human being deserving of basic decency." Abigail glanced around nervously. "You always were braver than the rest of us, Sarah, but be careful." She slipped extra coffee and sugar into the order. "On the house." As Sarah loaded her wagon, she felt eyes on her from every porch and window. Only months ago, such scrutiny would have wounded her deeply. Now, it seemed trivial compared to the quiet battle being fought in her small cabin, Dakota's struggle to regain some function, her fight to keep them both alive on dwindling resources. Back at the homestead, she found Dakota had dragged himself to the door, an arduous journey using only his arms. He was watching the western hills with an intensity that alarmed her. "What is it?" she asked, hurrying to help him back inside. "Riders," he said. "Not settlers. Different horses." Sarah felt a chill. "Raiders?" Dakota shook his head. "Scouts, watching." "Apache?" He nodded. "My people search for me." Sarah's heart sank. Of course they would. A respected warrior and scout wouldn't simply disappear without his people looking for him. "Will they come here?" she asked, helping him back to his pallet. "Not yet. Watching first." His eyes met hers. "You fear?" "I'm not sure what to feel," she admitted. "Would they take you back to your people? Could they help you more than I can?" Dakota was silent for a long moment. "No help for broken spine in my village. Old ones would sing death songs, young warriors would look away." The matter-of-fact acceptance in his voice broke something in Sarah. "I won't accept that," she said fiercely. "I've buried one man on this godforsaken land. I won't bury another." Surprise flickered across Dakota's face, quickly masked. But in that brief moment, Sarah glimpsed something she hadn't seen before. Hope. The badge caught the sunlight first, a territorial marshal's star, polished to a high shine that seemed out of place against the dust-covered rider approaching Sarah's homestead. Sarah spotted him from the garden, where she was harvesting the meager yield of early vegetables. She straightened, one hand shading her eyes, the other tightening on her basket. "Takoda," she called toward the open cabin door, keeping her voice even. "We have a visitor." Inside, she knew Takoda would be dragging himself to his observation point, a window seat she'd fashioned where he could watch the surroundings while she worked outside. 2 weeks of regular meals and exercises had strengthened his upper body considerably, though his legs remained unresponsive. The rider approached at a deliberate pace, giving Sarah time to set down her basket and smooth her apron. She recognized him now, Marshal Isaiah Reeves, the territorial lawman whose jurisdiction covered the scattered settlements in this part of Arizona. Unlike the settlement's self-appointed militia, Reeves carried actual authority from the territorial government. "Mrs. Winters," he called as he drew near. "Fine day." "Marshal Reeves," she returned neutrally. "What brings you to my homestead?" He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who lived in the saddle. "Reports I found concerning." He removed his hat, revealing graying hair cropped close to his skull. "Mind if we speak inside?" Sarah hesitated. Reeves had always been fair in his dealings, more measured than the settlement's hotheads. Still, his arrival couldn't be good news. "Of course," she said finally. "Would you care for coffee?" Much obliged. She led him to the cabin, conscious of his assessing gaze taking in the state of her property. The patched roof, the struggling garden, the empty corral where livestock should have been. Inside, Takoda sat by the window, his face impassive but his eyes alert. Reeves stopped short, his hand instinctively moving toward the holstered Colt at his hip before he caught himself. "So it's true," he said quietly. Sarah moved to the stove, keeping her voice casual. "I see news travels fast, even out here. Mrs. Winters, housing an Apache warrior, even in his condition, is a matter I can't ignore." The marshal's voice remained professional, but his eyes never left Takoda, especially with the raids increasing to the south. Takoda was an army. "Scout," Sarah said, placing coffee cups on the table. "He worked with your people until he was injured." "I'm aware of his history." Reeves finally looked at her. "That doesn't change the current situation. There's talk of war parties moving north. Tensions are high." Sarah poured the coffee. "And you think one paralyzed man poses a threat?" "What I think doesn't matter." Reeves took the offered cup but remained standing. "It's what others perceive. You're harboring what many consider an enemy combatant. He's a human being who was dumped on my doorstep as a cruel joke," Sarah replied, heat entering her voice despite her resolve to stay calm. "What would you have had me do? Leave him to die in the dirt?" Reeves sighed. "Your compassion does you credit, ma'am, but this territory runs on different rules than whatever eastern city you came from." "Philadelphia," she said tightly, "and basic humanity shouldn't change with geography." The marshal turned his attention to Takoda. "You understand what's being said here?" Takoda nodded once. "Then you understand you're putting this woman at risk. Your presence here marks her as a sympathizer at best, a traitor at worst." "His presence was forced on me," Sarah interjected, "by men from the settlement who thought it amusing. And yet you've chosen to continue the arrangement." Reeves studied them both. "There are alternatives. The army outpost left him to die," Sarah cut in, "and the reservation would do the same for a warrior who can't ride or hunt." Reeves didn't deny it. "There's an Apache camp 15 miles south. If your guest has tribal connections, they might take him in. My people," Takoda spoke for the first time, "would sing death songs. Better quick death than slow burden." The blunt assessment hung in the air. Sarah saw something shift in Reeves's expression, reluctant respect perhaps for Takoda's honesty. "Then we have a problem," the marshal said finally, "because I can't simply ride away and pretend I didn't see this situation." "What exactly is the law I'm breaking, Marshal?" Sarah asked. "Is there a territorial statute against providing medical care to an injured man?" Reeves grimaced. It's not that simple, and you know it. In times of conflict, harboring enemy combatants— He's not a combatant, Sarah insisted. He's a patient, and there's no declared war. Semantics won't protect you from a mob, Mrs. Winters. The marshal's voice softened slightly. I've seen what fear does to otherwise decent folks, and right now, with the raids and rumors flying, fear is winning. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Are you threatening me, Marshal Reeves? Warning. You, he corrected. Officially, I should arrest him and take him into custody. Unofficially. He glanced at Takoda, then back to Sarah. I've known good men on both sides of this conflict, including scouts who served with honor, only to be discarded when no longer useful. He set down his coffee cup, largely untouched. I'll be direct, Mrs. Winters. I can't endorse what you're doing, but I won't actively interfere for now. But if the situation with the Apache deteriorates further, or if public sentiment turns even uglier, my hands will be tied. I understand, Sarah said. Though her mind was racing with implications, Reeves replaced his hat. I'd advise you to keep your patient out of sight when others visit, and perhaps consider accelerating his recovery, if possible. His gaze lingered on Takoda. This territory isn't kind to those caught between worlds. At the door, the Marshal paused. 1 month, Mrs. Winters. That's how long I can reasonably delay any official action. After that, he touched the badge on his chest. This demands certain obligations. After he'd ridden away, Sarah sank into her single chair, suddenly exhausted. That could have gone worse, or better, Takoda observed dryly. He will return. Yes, Sarah agreed. Which means we have 1 month to figure out a solution. She looked at him intently. He's right about one thing. We need to accelerate your recovery if possible. Takoda's expression remained stoic, but his eyes held a question. You've been doing the arm exercises I showed you? She asked. He nodded. Good. Today we start something new. Sarah retrieved her grandmother's journal and flipped to a page she'd been studying. There's a technique here for stimulating the pathways between mind and body. The Cherokee called it waking the sleeping limbs. My leg's not sleeping, Takoda said flatly. Dead. We don't know that, Sarah insisted. Doc Wilson said the damage wasn't complete, and you've regained some strength in your upper body. Different. Maybe. Maybe not. She knelt beside his pallet. What have you got to lose by trying? The question hung between them. Finally, Takoda gave a single nod. How? Sarah showed him the journal's detailed drawings of pressure points and massage techniques. It requires daily work, several times daily, actually, combined with the poultices and teas. You have farm work, Takoda pointed out. Garden, repairs. Cannot stop for this. Then we'll adapt. Sarah's mind was already working through logistics. I'll teach you the techniques for your upper body. You can do those while I'm working outside. And we'll do the leg treatments morning and night. Takoda studied her face. Why? He asked, the question he'd posed before. This time, Sarah had a different answer. Because Marshal Reeves was right about one thing. This territory isn't kind to those caught between worlds. And like it or not, that's what we both are now. The realization settled over her like a physical weight. By choosing to care for Takoda, she had placed herself in opposition to her community, and Takoda, by accepting her help, had separated himself from his people's traditions. They were indeed caught between worlds, and their only allies were each other. 1 month, she repeated. Let's see what we can accomplish. They established a new routine immediately. Each morning began with the heated poultices applied to Takoda's spine, followed by a series of exercises Sarah designed based on her grandmother's journal and Takoda's knowledge of warrior training. While Sarah worked the homestead, Takoda practiced strengthening movements and applied pressure to specific points on his arms and chest that might stimulate nerve pathways. In the evenings, Sarah massaged his unresponsive legs, working from hip to ankle with firm, consistent pressure. Throughout, Takoda maintained a warrior's stoicism, though Sarah sometimes caught flashes of pain or frustration in his eyes when a particularly sensitive area was manipulated. As the first week passed with no visible improvement in his lower body, Sarah added another element to their regimen: knowledge exchange. During the leg treatments, Takoda taught her Apache words, building on the few she'd learned from a passing trader years before. In return, she began teaching him to read from her small collection of books. "Why this important?" Takoda asked during one session, struggling with the English letters she'd written on a slate. "Reading opens worlds," Sarah replied. "Knowledge is power, especially for those without other advantages." Takoda considered this. "In my tribe, memory is power. Old ones remember stories, songs, medicine ways. No need for marks on paper. Different kinds of power," Sarah acknowledged. "But in the white man's world, those who can't read are at the mercy of those who can." "I not live in white man's world," Takoda said, though something in his tone suggested he recognized the half-truth in his words. His current existence was certainly not within the Apache world. "Consider it a weapon, then," Sarah suggested. "One they don't expect you to possess." This perspective appealed to the warrior in him. He applied himself to the lessons with renewed determination, his quick intelligence making up for his lack of familiarity with written language. On the 10th day, after the marshal's visit, Sarah returned from town with troubling news. She'd overheard conversations at the general store about increased Apache activity. Warriors observed closer to the settlement than ever before. "They're watching the homestead," she told Takoda that evening as she worked on his legs. "Your people, Abigail overheard Cooper and his friends talking about tracks found near our eastern boundary." Takoda didn't seem surprised. "They know I'm here. Will they try to take you back?" He shook his head. "Not their way. Warrior chooses his path." He met her eyes. "I choose this path now, learning to be strong again." The simple declaration touched Sarah deeply. She continued the massage, working a particularly tight muscle in his thigh. "I felt that," Takoda said suddenly. Sarah's hands stilled. "What?" "Pressure. Dull, but there." He stared at his leg in disbelief. Hope surged through Sarah. "Can you feel this?" She pressed firmly on his knee. Takoda concentrated. "No, only higher." He indicated the area she'd been massaging. It wasn't much, just the faintest return of sensation in one small area. But it was something, the first concrete sign that their efforts might not be in vain. "This is good," Sarah said, trying to contain her excitement. "Very good. It means the pathways aren't completely severed." Takoda's expression remained guarded, but a new light entered his eyes, the dangerous spark of hope. That night, Sarah wrote in her own journal, which she'd started after Takoda's arrival. "Today, feeling returned to a small area of his upper thigh. After all our work, this tiny victory feels enormous. Marshal Reeves gave us 1 month. We have 20 days remaining. Is it possible? Can he regain enough function to satisfy whatever unnamed standard the law requires? And if not, what then? I find myself more invested in his recovery than I can explain rationally. Perhaps because helping him gives purpose to days that had become mere survival, or perhaps because in his determined eyes I see a reflection of my own stubborn refusal to surrender to circumstances. Whatever comes, I've made my choice. As Takoda said, a warrior chooses his path. I am no warrior, but I too have chosen. Heaven help us both. The yucca root felt rough against Sarah's palms as she ground it into pulp for the day's poultice. Dawn had barely broken, painting her small cabin in soft golden light. Beside her, Takoda sat propped against the wall, crushing herbs with a stone mortar she'd found in the storage shed. "These must be very fine," he instructed, demonstrating the circular grinding motion. "Medicine enters through skin better," Sarah nodded, mimicking his technique. They had fallen into this rhythm over the past 2 weeks, rising before dawn to prepare the day's treatments, working side by side in a silence that had grown comfortable. The yucca poultices had been Dakota's suggestion, building on Doc Wilson's mention of the plant. Mixed with other desert herbs that Dakota identified and Sarah gathered, they created a remedy more potent than either tradition could produce alone. "Your grandmother's book," Dakota said, nodding toward the journal open. "Beside them, speaks of fever medicine similar to my people's. Same plants, different ways. Perhaps wisdom finds similar paths no matter where it grows," Sarah replied, scraping the pulped yucca into a clay bowl. A ghost of a smile touched Dakota's lips, a rare expression that transformed his stoic features. "Wisdom, yes, but settlers rarely look to Apache for wisdom. Their loss," Sarah said simply. She helped him remove his shirt, a cast-off of Thomas's that she'd altered, and began applying the warm poultice to his back, focusing on the damaged area of his spine. Her fingers traced the scar where the bullet had entered, now healed, but still angry-looking against his copper skin. "There's less inflammation," she noted, "and the muscle spasms have decreased." Dakota nodded. "More feeling, too. Here." He touched his lower ribs. "And sometimes here." His hand hovered over his hip. The progress was slow but undeniable. In addition to the patches of returning sensation, Dakota had regained significant strength in his upper body. He could now drag himself across the cabin without assistance and had begun helping with small tasks, grinding herbs, mending tools, even teaching Sarah how to repair a broken arrow shaft he'd found near the property line. "Apache scouts still watch," he said, as she finished applying the poultice. 2 nights ago, near the creek, Sarah secured the bandage around his torso. "Do they mean us harm?" "No. Watching only. Curious." He met her eyes. "In their place I would be curious too. Apache warrior living with White Widow. Strange medicine. Is that how they see it? Medicine? Some. Others may think—" He paused, searching for words. "That you keep me for other reasons." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Like the settlers think." Dakota nodded, his expression unreadable. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Sarah rose to prepare breakfast. As she worked, she felt Dakota's eyes following her movements. "Marshall returns soon," he said finally. 15. "A days," Sarah confirmed, the countdown ever present in her mind. Not enough time. The blunt assessment hung in the air. Sarah wanted to argue, to insist that their treatments were working, that he would show enough improvement to satisfy Reeves. But false hope served neither of them. "Then we need allies," she said instead. "Doc Wilson already helps when he can. Perhaps—" A knock at the door interrupted her. Sarah tensed, instinctively moving between Dakota and the entrance. "Mrs. Winters?" It was Doc Wilson's voice, unexpectedly early for his weekly visit. Sarah opened the door to find the physician looking harried, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "You need to be careful," he said without preamble. "Cooper and his friends were drinking heavily at the saloon last night, talking about solving the Apache problem at your homestead." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Threats?" "Nothing specific, but ugly talk." Doc Wilson glanced past her to Dakota. "How's his progress?" "Some sensation returning. Upper body strength improving." The doctor nodded, entering to examine Dakota briefly. "Good, good, but not enough to satisfy. Those looking for trouble." He lowered his voice. "Supplies are becoming an issue, Sarah. Abigail says people are refusing to sell to her if they suspect it's for you." "We're managing," Sarah said, though her dwindling pantry told a different story. "That yucca poultice," Doc Wilson commented, inspecting Dakota's back. "Your grandmother's recipe?" "Dakota's, actually, combined with her techniques." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Interesting combination. Seems effective." He hesitated. "Would you be willing to prepare some for my patients? Mrs. Thornton's rheumatism isn't responding to conventional treatments." Sarah exchanged glances with Dakota, who gave a slight nod. We can do that, she agreed. But how would you explain the source? Doc Wilson smiled wryly. I believe I've just discovered an old remedy in my late wife's papers. Quite fortuitous. It was a small opening, a tiny bridge between worlds, but Sarah recognized its potential immediately. What else might your late wife's papers contain, Doctor? 3 months after Dakota's arrival, Sarah stood in her field, hands on hips, surveying Thomas's unfinished irrigation system. Her late husband had begun the project during their first season, a network of shallow channels designed to divert creek water to their parched crops. He'd completed only a quarter of it before fever took him. Each spring, Sarah attempted to extend the system, but without Thomas's engineering knowledge, her efforts yielded poor results. Now, with planting season approaching and her resources dwindling, the need for effective irrigation had become critical. Problem? Dakota asked from the cabin doorway. He sat in the crude wheelchair Sarah had fashioned, wagon wheels attached, to a modified chair, allowing him mobility around the immediate homestead. His upper body had grown impressively strong, though his legs still responded only with occasional sensation. Same as always, Sarah called back. Water, or lack of it. Dakota wheeled himself along the packed dirt path to the field edge. Over the months, he'd grown comfortable navigating the homestead's immediate surroundings, his arms powerful enough to propel him over rough terrain. Show me, he said, studying the incomplete channels with interest. Sarah knelt beside him, drawing. In the dirt, Thomas planned to bring water from the creek in stages, using the natural slope. But I can't get the levels right. Water pools here and never reaches the southern section. Dakota's eyes narrowed as he studied the land. Apache used different method. Small dams stepped, water slows, sinks deep. He pointed to various points in the field. Build here, 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 less water lost to sun. Could you show me how? He nodded. Need materials, stones, clay, brush. By midday they had gathered supplies, and Dakota directed Sarah in constructing the first small dam. His knowledge of desert water management, honed through generations of Apache survival in arid lands, transformed the approach entirely. Not straight channels, he explained, sketching in the dirt. Curves like snake. Water moves slower, seeps deeper. Sarah worked under his guidance, moving stones and packing clay according to his instructions. Though he couldn't physically help with the labor, his mind remained a warrior's, sharp, strategic, attuned to the environment in ways her Eastern education hadn't prepared her for. Thomas would have appreciated this design, she said, sitting back on her heels to wipe sweat from her brow. He was always looking for better solutions. Good man? Dakota asked. A rare personal question. Sarah nodded. The best I've known. Kind, but stubborn. Believed we could build something here when everyone said the land was worthless. She gestured around them. Maybe they were right. Land speaks differently to different ears, Dakota said. Apache hear one story, settlers another. And what story does it tell you? He considered the question seriously, that life hides beneath hardness, that patience reveals what haste cannot see. His eyes met hers. Your husband heard this too, perhaps. The insight struck Sarah deeply. Thomas had indeed spoken of the land's potential, asking for patience when early crops failed. The parallel between her late husband's vision and Dakota's Apache wisdom was unexpected, but somehow fitting. Their work was interrupted by the approach of riders, 3 men on horseback, moving deliberately toward the homestead from the east. Sarah tensed, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive red beard. Cooper, she muttered, standing quickly. And his friends. Dakota's expression hardened. Go inside, bring rifle. I won't leave you out here alone. Not suggestion, he said firmly. Strategy. You inside, armed. Me here, visible. They see Apache man cannot stand. Feel brave, safe, make mistakes. The tactical thinking of a warrior, Sarah realized. She squeezed his shoulder and hurried to the cabin, retrieving Thomas's old rifle from above the door. She'd never fired it at a person, had prayed she'd never need to. Now she checked the ammunition with hands that remained surprisingly steady. Through the window, she watched Cooper and his companions stop several yards from Takoda, who sat impassively in his wheelchair. She couldn't hear their words, but Cooper's mocking gestures and his companions' laughter told the story clearly enough. Takoda remained still, his posture betraying nothing of the powerful mind and strengthening body beneath his seemingly broken exterior. He was playing a role, Sarah realized. The defeated warrior, the cripple, the object of their derision, letting them believe what they needed to believe. She positioned herself in the doorway, rifle visible but not aimed. "State your business, Mr. Cooper," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Cooper turned, exaggerated surprise on his florid face. "Why, Mrs. Winters, we just came to check on your house guest, making sure he's not too much of a burden." "Your concern is noted. Anything else?" The men exchanged glances, their bravado slightly diminished by her calm demeanor and the rifle in her hands. "Town's concerned about Apache scouts seen near here," Cooper said, his tone hardening. "Wondering if your pet savage might be signaling them." "Mr. Takoda was an army scout before his injury," Sarah replied evenly. "If anyone understands the importance of settlement security, it's him." Cooper spat on the ground. "Mr. Takoda," he mimicked. "Listen to yourself, woman. You're harboring an enemy." "I'm caring for an injured man, as any Christian should." Sarah stepped forward. "Now, unless you have actual business here, I'll thank you to leave my property." The eagle feather lay across Takoda's palm, its black and white pattern catching the morning light that filtered through the cabin window. Sarah watched as the elderly Apache man, introduced only as Maka, Earth, spoke softly in their native tongue, placing the feather in Takoda's medicine pouch. This was the third visit from members of Takoda's tribe, a development that had begun cautiously a month ago with 2 young warriors observing from a distance, then approaching with measured diplomacy. Now a small delegation arrived monthly, bringing supplies, tribal medicine, and news. Sarah kept her distance during these visits, respecting the private exchanges while remaining visible enough to demonstrate her non-threatening presence. She had learned to read the subtle signs of tribal hierarchy, the deference shown to Maka, the warrior's protective stance, the careful way they included Takoda in conversations despite his condition. After the visitors departed, Takoda held up the eagle feather. "Great honor," Takoda nodded. "He is medicine man, teacher from my youth. Says I walk between worlds now." A rare smile touched his lips. "Like you." The comparison startled her, though its truth was undeniable. Sarah's relationship with the settlement had deteriorated further since Cooper's visit. Only Doc Wilson and Abigail maintained regular contact, the latter bringing increasingly worrying news. "Tax collector comes next week," Sarah said, changing the subject to more immediate concerns. "I don't have enough." Their financial situation had grown dire. With planting season upon them and most of her resources directed toward Takoda's care and recovery, Sarah faced the very real possibility of losing the homestead. Takoda studied her face. "How much needed?" $10. Might as well be 100. She sighed, sinking into her chair. "I've sold everything of value except Thomas's watch and my books." Takoda was silent for a long moment, then wheeled himself to the small workbench they'd set up near the window. From beneath it he retrieved a bundle wrapped in deerskin. "Medicine," he said, unwrapping the package to reveal dozens of small pouches filled with herbs and roots. "Like what we make for Doc Wilson's patients, but Apache ways, for pain, fever, wound healing." Sarah stared at the collection. "You've been making these?" "When?" "While you sleep," he said simply. "Hands need work. Mine too." The implications were immediate and clear. "You think Doc Wilson could sell these? Or trade?" "Many settlers respect Indian medicine, even if they fear Indian people." He indicated a particular pouch. This bark stops fever better than white man's pills. This root," he pointed to another, "draws poison from snake bite." Hope flickered to life in Sarah's chest. A business partnership. They approached Doc Wilson that afternoon, bringing samples of their remedies. The physician examined each preparation with professional interest, asking detailed questions about ingredients and applications. "Remarkable," he murmured, testing a salve between his fingers. "The settlements had 3 cases of infected wounds this month alone. This could help where my conventional treatments have failed." "And the financial arrangement?" Sarah asked. Cautiously, Doc Wilson understood immediately. "I propose a fair exchange. I'll provide these remedies to my patients for a fee, taking a portion for my services and passing the remainder to you." He glanced at Dakota. "To both of you. By week's end, they had their first proceeds. $8 from the sale of various remedies to grateful patients who asked no questions about their origin. Combined with Sarah's last reserves and a small loan from Abigail, it was enough to satisfy the tax collector." As Sarah counted out the coins on her table, a strange feeling overcame her, not quite prosperity but possibility. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had glimpsed a path forward that didn't end in failure and loss. "Partnership works," Dakota observed, watching her face. "Yes," she agreed softly, "it does." That evening, as Sarah conducted Dakota's physical therapy, now an established ritual of massage and movement, she noticed increased resistance when manipulating his right leg. "Are you tensing deliberately?" she asked, feeling the muscle tighten beneath her hands. Dakota's eyes widened slightly. "No." Then, with cautious hope, "Again?" Sarah pressed against the resistance, and unmistakably his leg pushed back, just a flutter of movement, but intentional. "Dakota," she whispered, her voice catching, "you moved it." His face, usually so controlled, revealed naked emotion, disbelief, hope, determination. He concentrated fiercely, and the leg twitched again, the movement minimal, but undeniable. Sarah laughed aloud, tears springing to her eyes. Without thinking, she clasped his hand in both of hers. "It's working," she said. "It's really working." Dakota's fingers tightened around hers. "Because of you. Because of us," she corrected. "Our partnership." Something shifted between them in that moment. A boundary crossed, though neither acknowledged it directly. Sarah released his hand and resumed the therapy with renewed purpose, while Dakota's eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. Outside, the desert sky blazed with sunset colors, painting their small cabin in hues of promise. The new wheelchair gleamed in the afternoon sun, its polished oak frame and well-oiled wagon wheels a testament to craftsmanship far beyond Sarah's first crude attempt. She watched nervously as Dakota examined every joint and fitting with careful fingers. "Too much money," he said, though his eyes betrayed his appreciation for the chair's quality. "A necessary investment," Sarah countered. "The old one was falling apart, and you need better mobility if we're expanding the medicine business." Their enterprise had grown steadily over the past month. What began as occasional remedies for Doc Wilson's patients had evolved into a modest but reliable income. Word had spread beyond Copper Springs to neighboring settlements, bringing requests for their unique preparations that combined Apache wisdom with settler herbalism. Dakota tested the wheelchair's movement, the larger wheels, and improved balance, allowing him to navigate the packed dirt around the cabin with greater ease. His arms, now corded with muscle from months of self-propulsion, moved the chair in smooth, controlled motions. "Good work," he conceded. "Who built?" "Mr. Jensen, the settlement carpenter." Sarah smiled wryly. "I may be ostracized socially, but apparently my money spends the same as anyone else's." Dakota nodded, understanding the complex dynamics at play. While most settlers still regarded their arrangement with suspicion or outright hostility, economic pragmatism had begun to soften. Some attitudes, The carpenter had been gruff but professional, asking no questions while accepting payment for his skilled labor. "We go to town today?" Dakota asked, referencing their planned delivery of medicines to Doc Wilson. Sarah hesitated. Until now, she had made all town visits alone, leaving Dakota at the homestead. Bringing him into Copper Springs would provoke reactions, none of them predictable, few of them kind. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It won't be pleasant." Dakota's expression hardened with determination. "Cannot hide forever. Your people must see me as man, not enemy." He patted the chair. "Good time to test new wheels." The journey to town was slow but uneventful, the improved wheelchair handling the rutted road better than expected. Sarah walked beside Dakota, occasionally helping navigate difficult stretches, but mostly allowing him the dignity of independent movement. His strength continued to impress her, not just physical endurance, but the deeper strength of character that refused to be diminished by disability or prejudice. As they approached the settlement's outskirts, Sarah felt eyes turning toward them. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A woman hurried her children indoors. Two men near the livery stable reached instinctively for rifles before recognizing Sarah and standing down, though their expressions remained hostile. "Breathe," Dakota murmured, noticing her tension. "Walk tall." Sarah straightened her spine and continued forward, focusing on Doc Wilson's office at the far end of the main street. With each step, she felt the weight of stares, some curious, others fearful, a few openly contemptuous. She'd experienced isolation before, but never this acute sense of being a spectacle. Halfway there, Jeremiah Cooper stepped into their path, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "Well, well, Mrs. Winters bringing her pet savage to town. Ain't that something, boys?" Several men chuckled nervously behind him. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Dakota spoke first. "Good day, Mr. Cooper," he said clearly, his English deliberate but precise after months of Sarah's tutoring. "Fine weather for planting." The ordinary greeting, delivered with dignity from a man they'd expected to remain silent, visibly startled Cooper and his companions. Before they could recover, a new voice entered the confrontation. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Dakota," Abigail called, hurrying from her store. "I have your order ready. Won't you come in?" The storekeeper's public acknowledgement of Dakota, not as the Apache or the Indian, but as Mr. Dakota, created a subtle shift in the tableau. Not acceptance, but disruption of the expected narrative. Cooper spat on the ground. "Careful, Abigail. Association with Indians and their sympathizers could be bad for business." "Funny," Abigail replied evenly. "My ledger shows otherwise." "Quality medicine sells itself, regardless of its makers," she gestured toward her store. "This way, please." As they followed Abigail, leaving Cooper fuming, Sarah felt a small victory in the exchange. Not a battle won, but a position established. Inside the store, Abigail spoke quickly. "Doc Wilson's waiting for you. He has 3 new orders, including one from the mayor's wife, though she doesn't know the source." She glanced at Dakota. "Your reputation as a healer is growing, but most still don't know who's behind the remedies." "Truth finds its way," Dakota said simply. Doc Wilson's reception was warmer, his clinical eye appreciating the improved wheelchair and Dakota's evident physical progress. "The leg movements are increasing," he asked, examining the limbs in question. "Small motions," Dakota confirmed. "Right stronger than left." "Remarkable," the doctor murmured. "By all conventional wisdom, your condition should have been permanent." Sarah shared a look with Dakota. "We found conventional wisdom has its limitations, Doctor." As they concluded their business and prepared to leave town, Marshal Reeves intercepted them near the edge of settlement. "Bold move," he commented, eyeing Dakota's presence in town. "Not sure if it's brave or foolish." "Perhaps both," Sarah acknowledged. "But necessary." The Marshal studied Dakota with professional assessment. "You're looking stronger. Making progress with your recovery?" Dakota nodded. "Each day, small victories." Something like approval flickered across Reeves's weathered face. Good. This territory needs more victories, however small. He glanced around at the watching townsfolk, but proceed with caution. Not everyone appreciates a challenge to their assumptions. The map spread across Sarah's kitchen table, rendered in charcoal on a piece of tanned deerskin, a gift from Takoda's last tribal visitors. Sarah marveled at the detail. Ridgelines, water sources and trails she'd never known existed despite 3 years on this land. Takoda had marked Apache territories with subtle symbols, settler communities with simple squares, and military outposts with crossed lines. "This is remarkable," she murmured, tracing the meandering line that represented the creek running through her property. "Memory map," Takoda explained. "Apache scouts learn land like face of loved one." His fingers tapped a section south of the settlement. "Problem here." Sarah leaned closer. "What kind of problem?" "Settlers plan hunting party. Will cross Apache sacred ground." He indicated a small area marked with a distinctive spiral. "Young warriors already angry about past violations. More trouble will come." Sarah studied his face. "How do you know about the hunting party?" "Overheard in town. Cooper and others planning deer hunt south." The implications were immediate and troubling. Cooper's group, armed and likely liquored, blundering into sacred Apache territory already under dispute. "It was a recipe for bloodshed." "We should warn them," Sarah said. Takoda's expression darkened. "They would listen to you? Woman who houses Apache?" He was right, of course. Her standing in the community had deteriorated to the point where any warning from her would be dismissed as Indian sympathizing. Yet the alternative, saying nothing, meant potential violence that could spread beyond the initial confrontation. "What about Marshal Reeves?" she suggested. "He might listen, especially with this map as evidence." Takoda considered this, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But helping settlers avoid Apache territory," he struggled to find the words, "my people would see as betrayal, and letting your people attack ignorant settlers. How is that honorable?" The question hung between them, highlighting the impossible position they both occupied, caught between worlds belonging fully to neither. Takoda touched the eagle feather that now remained permanently fixed to his medicine pouch. "Honor demands hard choices," he finally said. "This knowledge," he tapped the map, "was given for hunting, surviving, not for—" He hesitated. "Not for helping white men," Sarah finished quietly. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "But you are not white men. You are Sarah." The simple distinction moved her deeply. "And you're not the Apache. You're Takoda." A moment of understanding passed between them, transcending the cultural divide that should have made them enemies. "We warn Reeves," Takoda decided, "but not about sacred ground. Only that Apache warriors patrol there, enough to change hunting path." Sarah nodded. "A compromise that might prevent bloodshed without betraying your people's secrets." They sent a message to Marshal Reeves that afternoon, delivered by a reluctant but cooperative Abigail. By evening, the marshal himself rode out to their homestead, his expression grave as he studied the map Takoda had prepared. "This is military-grade intelligence," Reeves said, clearly impressed. "You could track enemy movements across this entire region with this level of detail." "Not enemy," Takoda corrected firmly. "Apache, my people." Reeves had the grace to look abashed. "Force of habit. Apologies." He traced the southern hunting grounds. "You're certain there are Apache patrols in this area currently?" "Yes, protecting hunting grounds before winter, and Cooper's boys are heading straight for them." Reeves sighed. "I'll redirect the hunting party. Suggest the western foothills instead. Better game there anyway." As he prepared to leave, Reeves paused at the door. "This information may have prevented serious trouble. I'm grateful." He studied them both with newfound respect. "You two have created something unusual here. A bridge of sorts." After he departed, Sarah and Takoda sat in silence, the weight of their decision settling between them. "Did we do right?" Sarah finally asked. For your people, yes, Dakota replied. For mine, he shrugged. Time will tell. And for us? The question surprised them both. When had us become a consideration separate from either of their communities? We chose life over pride, Dakota said simply. Always right choice. 3 days later, they received word that Cooper's hunting party had been redirected without incident. A small victory in a conflict that had raged for generations. That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, "Today, we prevented blood from being spilled by building a bridge of knowledge between worlds. It feels both significant and utterly inadequate, like bailing water from a leaking boat. Yet Dakota says even small acts of peace matter. Water wears away stone not by force, but by persistence. His wisdom continues to surprise me, as does the strange path we now walk together, belonging neither to his world nor fully to mine. Thomas would hardly recognize me now, living with an Apache, making medicines, drawing maps to prevent conflict rather than standing on principle. Yet I believe he would understand. He always saw the value in pragmatic compassion. As for Dakota, I hardly know how to describe what he has become to me. Teacher, partner, friend, something more perhaps, though neither of us has words for it. The silver pocket watch caught the lamplight as Sarah turned it over in her hands. Her father's initials, JHM for Jonathan Henry Montgomery, remained crisp in the engraving despite decades of use. It was her last valuable possession, a piece of Philadelphia that had followed her west, surviving the journey that had claimed so many other remnants of her former life. It would fetch enough to cover the seed cost, she said quietly, more to herself than to Dakota, who sat by the fire, practicing his reading. Important to you, he observed, setting the book aside. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Sarah nodded. My father gave it to me before we left. Said time was precious on the frontier. A sad smile touched her lips. He wasn't wrong. Spring planting season loomed, and despite their medicine business's modest success, they still lacked funds for essential supplies. The harsh reality of frontier economics remained unchanged. No crops meant no food, regardless of their healing. Knowledge? Dakota wheeled himself closer, his movement now fluid after months of practice. His legs, though still largely unresponsive, occasionally showed promising twitches. The right leg in particular had developed reflexive movements that Doc Wilson called remarkable during his examinations. Other options, Dakota suggested. Army scout camp 3 days south. They pay for medicine, information. Sarah hesitated. You want to work with the Army again? After how they abandoned you? Different commanding officer now, Lieutenant Davis. Fair man, according to Marshall. She studied his face, seeing the complex emotions beneath his stoic expression. For Dakota to suggest cooperation with the military, that had once discarded him, represented a profound evolution in his thinking. Why? She asked simply. Dakota was silent for a moment. Land does not care who plants it. Seed does not care whose hands set it. But if no seed... He gestured to the watch. Too much sacrifice already. The logic was sound, but Sarah sensed something deeper in his proposal. Perhaps a desire to reclaim a part of his former identity as a valued scout whose knowledge commanded respect. We'll try, she agreed, tucking the watch away. Both of us. The journey to the Army outpost proved more challenging than anticipated. Dakota's wheelchair, while effective around the homestead, struggled with the rougher terrain beyond. By the second day, Sarah found herself frequently helping navigate difficult passages, both of them exhausted by nightfall. Was easier when I could walk, Dakota said dryly as they made camp, his rare humor emerging more frequently these days. Sarah smiled as she built their fire. Everything was easier when you could walk, according to you. Not everything. His voice softened. Some. Things better now? The simple statement lingered between them as Sarah prepared their meal. What had begun as an unwanted burden for both of them had evolved into something neither could have anticipated. Partnership, understanding, perhaps something more. The army camp appeared on the horizon the following afternoon, a collection of canvas tents and wooden structures nestled in a defensible position along a ridgeline. As they approached, sentries spotted them, and within minutes a small party rode out to intercept them. "Identify yourselves," called the lead rider, a young corporal with a nervous trigger finger on his Springfield rifle. "Sarah Winters and Takoda, from Copper Springs Settlement," Sarah replied clearly. "We've come to speak with Lieutenant Davis." The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the unusual pair, a white woman and an Apache man in a wheelchair. After a brief consultation, they escorted them into camp, where curious eyes followed their progress toward the command tent. Lieutenant Davis proved to be younger than Sarah expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and a thoughtful demeanor. He received them with professional courtesy, offering coffee and listening without interruption as Sarah explained their proposition: medicinal preparations and territorial intelligence in exchange for fair payment. "Takoda," the lieutenant said, recognition dawning. "You were with Captain Thornton's scout detachment, wounded at Coyote Ridge." Takoda nodded. 2 years ago?" Davis's expression clouded. "I heard what happened after. That wasn't right." He studied Takoda's wheelchair with a soldier's assessing eye. "Yet here you are." "Here I am," Takoda agreed. Simply, the lieutenant turned to Sarah. "And you, Mrs. Winters, Marshal Reeves mentioned your unusual situation. Said you prevented a conflict with your warning about the southern hunting grounds." "We did what seemed right," Sarah replied. "That's rare enough these days." Davis leaned forward. "I'm authorized to contract civilian scouts and suppliers. Your medicines would be valuable. We lose more men to fever and infection than bullets. And accurate intelligence is always at a premium." He named a figure that made Sarah's eyes widen, enough not only for seeds but for other crucial supplies as well. "There's a condition," Davis added. "I need Takoda's assessment of Apache movements across the entire eastern region. Not for offensive operations," he clarified quickly, seeing their expressions. "For avoiding unnecessary conflict. The Army's changing its approach under General Howard's influence." Takoda considered this carefully. "Information to prevent fighting. Not cause it?" "Precisely." Davis's gaze was steady. "I have no interest in provoking the Apache. I've seen what comes of that approach." After further negotiation, they reached an agreement. Takoda would provide maps and intelligence focused on areas where military patrols might inadvertently spark conflict. Sarah would prepare medicinal supplies on a monthly basis. In return, the Army would provide payment and occasional escort services for their deliveries. As they left the camp with their first payment secured, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The pocket watch remained safely in her pocket, a piece of her past preserved while they built a future. "Good trade," Takoda observed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "A bridge between worlds, as Marshal Reeves might say." "Many bridges now," Takoda replied thoughtfully, "getting stronger." The official letter bore the Army's seal, the parchment crisp and formal against Sarah's weathered hands. Lieutenant Davis's flowing signature adorned the bottom alongside the Territorial Commander's official stamp. It was, in every sense, a document of protection, a formal commendation acknowledging Takoda's service as a civilian scout and Sarah's contributions as a medical supplier. "He calls you the seated scout," Sarah noted, reading aloud the respectful title Davis had used. Throughout the document, Takoda's lips quirked in what had become a more frequent half-smile. "Better than crippled Apache." 3 months had passed since their first arrangement with the Army. The partnership had flourished beyond expectation, with Takoda's intelligence proving instrumental in preventing several potential conflicts. His reputation had spread among military circles, the scout who could read landscapes and track movements from memory, providing insights that walking men missed. "This should help with the settlement council," Sarah said, carefully folding the letter. "Official recognition from the army carries weight, even with Cooper and his friends. Tomorrow, they would appear before Copper Springs leadership to address the growing whispers about their arrangement. While their medicine business had gained acceptance through demonstrable results, their living situation remained a source of scandal, unmarried, unrelated, and from enemy cultures. Will not change." "All minds," Dakota observed pragmatically. "No," Sarah agreed, "but it offers legitimacy they can't easily dismiss." Their homestead had transformed during the productive summer months. The modified irrigation system had yielded a respectable crop. The medicine shed they'd built now housed organized shelves of preparations. Sarah had even purchased 2 milk cows and a small flock of chickens, tangible evidence of their improving circumstances. Most significant were the changes in Dakota himself. His upper body had developed remarkable strength, allowing him to perform many tasks from his wheelchair. More promising still were the increasing movements in his right leg, not just reflexes now, but deliberate, if limited, control. That evening, Sarah conducted their regular therapy session, manipulating his legs through their range of motion, while Dakota concentrated on sending signals from mind to muscle. "Again," he instructed, focusing intently on his right foot. Sarah watched as the foot flexed slightly, a small movement, but undeniably intentional. "That's the strongest yet," she encouraged. "Doc Wilson says the pathways are rebuilding themselves." "Slowly," Dakota said, frustration edging his voice. "But surely." Sarah moved to his left leg, which remained less responsive. "Remember where you started." Dakota acknowledged this with a nod. 6 months ago, he had been a man waiting to die, paralyzed and discarded. Now he contributed daily to their shared enterprise, his knowledge valued, his presence a cornerstone of their increasingly successful partnership. As Sarah worked, Dakota studied her face in the lamplight. "You look tired." The observation, gentle, in its directness, caught her off guard. "It's been a busy season. Not just work," he said perceptively. "Worry about tomorrow." Sarah sighed, her hands stilling on his leg. "The council meeting matters more than I want to admit. We've built something good here, something that works despite everything. But one decision from those men could end it all. Because I am Apache. Or because we live under same roof. Both. Neither." She resumed the therapy, avoiding his eyes. "Because we don't fit their understanding of how things should be." "And how should things be?" Dakota asked, his voice softer. "Between us?" The question hung in the air, acknowledging what had remained unspoken through months of partnership. Their relationship had evolved beyond caregiver and patient, beyond business associates, into something neither had names for. A connection that bridged worlds in ways that made sense only to them. "I don't know," Sarah admitted honestly. "I only know that what we've built matters to me, that you—" she faltered. "That I matter," Dakota finished simply. "Yes." A comfortable silence settled between them as Sarah completed the therapy session. As she helped him from the table to his wheelchair, Dakota's hand caught hers. "We face council together," he said, firmly, "as we have faced everything." The council meeting the next day proved less confrontational than feared. The army commendation carried significant weight, as did the economic benefits their enterprise now brought to the settlement. Doc Wilson spoke forcefully about the medical value of their preparations, while Abigail presented figures showing increased commerce from visitors seeking their remedies. Mayor Blackwood, ever the pragmatist, summarized the council's position. "While the arrangement remains unconventional, the tangible benefits to Copper Springs cannot be denied. The council acknowledges the contributions of Mrs. Winters and Mr. Takoda to the settlement's welfare and medical needs. It wasn't wholehearted acceptance, but it was official recognition, a victory of sorts. As they left the meeting, several settlers approached with cautious respect, asking about treatments for specific ailments or expressing interest in Takoda's knowledge of local game movements. "The seated scout," one older man said, using the title from Davis's letter, "heard you can track a deer herd from memory of hoofprints alone. That true?" Takoda nodded, his dignity evident even from the wheelchair. "Land speaks to those who listen." Later, as they returned to the homestead, Sarah noticed a change in how people regarded them, still wary, still uncertain, but with a new element of respect. Something had shifted, however slightly. "Progress," Takoda observed, reading her thoughts. "As he often seemed to do. Small steps," Sarah agreed with a smile, "like your recovery." "Both moving forward," he said, reaching for her hand as they approached their home. Together, the land deed lay unfolded on the table between them, its official territorial seals and legal language stark in the afternoon light. Sarah stared at it, trying to comprehend the implications of what Marshal Reeves had just explained. "Silver," she repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "On the Crawford property bordering mine. The richest vein discovered in the territory this year," Reeves confirmed, his expression carefully neutral. "The mining company believes it extends through several adjacent properties, including mine." It wasn't a question. "Likely, yes." The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Winters, I'm here as a courtesy. The Silverado Mining Company has purchased 3 properties surrounding yours already. Crawford's place went for 50 times its previous value." Sarah glanced at Takoda, who sat silently observing the exchange, his dark eyes missing nothing. 8 months of partnership had taught her to read the subtle signals in his posture. The slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his concern. "So, that's why Cooper and Mayor Blackwood have suddenly renewed their objections to our arrangement," Sarah said, the pieces falling into place. "It was never about propriety or Apache fears. It's about the land." Reeves didn't deny it. "Business. Interests change the calculus of frontier justice, Mrs. Winters. I won't pretend otherwise." "And your interest, Marshal?" Takoda asked quietly, his first words since Reeves had arrived with the news. A flash of discomfort crossed the lawman's face. "I enforce territorial law, nothing more." "Yet you warn us," Takoda observed. Reeves sighed. "Let's say I prefer honest dealings, even with mining companies. They'll be sending representatives tomorrow with an offer. Thought you should have time to consider your position." After he departed, Sarah paced the cabin, the implications overwhelming. The worthless land that had taken Thomas's life, that she'd struggled to make productive for 3 years, now suddenly valuable beyond imagination. 50 times, she murmured. "We could go anywhere, do anything." "We?" Takoda asked, the single word laden with meaning. Sarah stopped pacing. "Of course. Did you think Many would," he said simply. "Take money, start new life, without complications." She knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers, a gesture that had become natural between them. "You are not a complication, Takoda. You're my partner." Something softened in his expression. "Partner. In everything," she affirmed. "Whatever we decide about this offer, we decide together." The mining company's representative arrived the following morning, a well-dressed man named Harrison with an Eastern accent and practiced charm. He laid out maps showing the silver vein's projected path directly through Sarah's property. "Mrs. Winters, we're prepared to offer $20,000, he said smoothly. 20 times the land's agricultural value, and that's just our opening position." The figure made Sarah's breath catch. It was more money than she'd ever imagined possessing, enough to build a new life anywhere, to never worry about survival again. "And if I decline?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Harrison's smile tightened slightly. The territory is eager for economic development. Properties impeding mining access have been known to face legal challenges, increased taxes, water rights disputes, easement claims. The threat, however veiled, was clear. "I'll need time to consider," Sarah said. "Of course." Harrison rose to leave. 3 days should be sufficient. We're eager to begin operations. After he departed, Sarah and Dakota sat in silence, absorbing the implications. "They will not stop," Dakota finally said. "Men who hunger for silver have empty hearts." "We could take the money," Sarah suggested, playing devil's advocate. "Find land elsewhere, somewhere more accepting of us." Dakota wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the homestead they'd transformed together. "Running is easy. Standing is hard." He turned to face her. "What does your heart say?" Before she could answer, hoofbeats approached, a lone rider pushing his horse hard. It was Doc Wilson, his expression grave, as Sarah met him at the door. "Trouble," he said without preamble. "The mining company has filed a claim with territorial authorities. They're challenging your homestead rights, saying the property was abandoned when Thomas died and you failed to maintain proper improvements." "That's absurd," Sarah protested. "I've worked this land continuously." "They're claiming a woman alone couldn't possibly have maintained a valid homestead claim." Doc Wilson glanced at Dakota. "And they're arguing that allowing an Apache to live here constitutes a surrender of settler rights." "The silver has revealed their true nature," Dakota observed quietly. Doc Wilson nodded grimly. "There's more. Marshal Reeves has been relieved of duties pending an investigation into his improper relationships with territorial interests. His replacement arrives tomorrow, a company man, by all accounts." As the implications sank in, Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Their warning had cost Reeves his position. Now they faced not just social disapproval, but coordinated legal action backed by powerful financial interests. "They'll try to force us out one way or another," she realized aloud. "Yes," Doc Wilson agreed, "and they have the law, money, and public sentiment on their side." "Not all public sentiment," came a new voice. Abigail stood in the doorway, having arrived unnoticed during their conversation. "Some of us remember who provided medicines when the fever hit last winter, who gave warning about the Apache hunting. Grounds, who's been nothing but an asset to this community despite every obstacle." She stepped forward, determination in her usually gentle features. "You're not alone in this fight." The silver arrowhead gleamed in Dakota's palm, its metallic surface catching the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the cabin window. He had found it that morning, while examining the rocky outcropping on the eastern boundary of Sarah's property, a place he'd insisted on visiting after hearing the mining company's claims. "Not just on Crawford's land," he said, handing the arrowhead to Sarah. "Here too, rich vein." Sarah turned the object over in her hands, feeling its substantial weight. Not merely silver-colored, but actual silver, pure enough that someone from Dakota's tribe had once fashioned it into a weapon tip. "My people know this place has clizeto," Dakota explained, using the Apache word for silver. "Sacred metal, not for mining, for small ceremonial items only. That's why they camp near here sometimes," Sarah realized. "Not just for water, but for this." Dakota nodded. "Old ones would take small amounts, never disturb Earth spirit by digging deep." The implications settled over them like a physical weight. Their land didn't just border a silver deposit. It contained one. The mining company's aggressive tactics suddenly made perfect sense. They didn't just want access through Sarah's property. They wanted what lay beneath it. "This changes everything," Sarah murmured. "Yes," Dakota agreed. "Makes fight harder, more dangerous." A knock at the door interrupted their contemplation. Doc Wilson and Abigail had returned, this time accompanied by the former Marshal Reeves, now in civilian clothes, his familiar badge conspicuously absent. "Town meeting's been called," Reeves announced without preamble. "Tomorrow at noon. Special session to discuss abandoned and improperly maintained homesteads, meaning yours specifically. They're moving fast, Doc Wilson added grimly. Mining company representative is buying drinks at the saloon, talking about jobs, prosperity, progress. And the new marshal, Sarah asked. Arrived this morning. Had a long meeting with Mayor Blackwood. And the mining company, Reeves's expression darkened. Former deputy from Silver City, known for handling claim disputes favorably for corporate interests. Abigail stepped forward. Sarah, we've been talking. There's a legal avenue you might consider. She glanced uncomfortably at Dakota. It's unconventional. At this point, unconventional seems to be our specialty, Sarah replied dryly. Doc Wilson cleared his throat. The mining company's claim hinges partly on the argument that a woman alone can't maintain a valid homestead. But a married woman with a husband working the land, the implication hung in the air. Sarah's eyes widened as she grasped their suggestion. You want me to find a husband? Now? Not just any husband, Reeves said, nodding toward Dakota. Your current partner. Stunned silence filled the cabin. Sarah looked at Dakota, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though she detected a flash of something in his eyes. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. That's impossible, she finally managed. The territorial authorities would never recognize... Actually, Doc Wilson interrupted, there's no specific prohibition against intermarriage in this territory. It's discouraged, certainly, but not illegal. Other territories have explicit bans, but Arizona hasn't codified such restrictions yet. And a marriage certificate would strengthen your legal claim considerably, Reeves added. Make it harder for them to challenge your right to the land. Even if it were possible legally, Sarah said, struggling to process the suggestion. Who would perform such a ceremony? No minister would. Reverend Matthews, Abigail interjected. The circuit preacher. He'll be here tomorrow for his monthly visit. He's progressive in his views. Served as a missionary among the Cherokee before coming west. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid developments. Just days ago, their biggest concern had been expanding their medicine business and continuing Dakota's therapy. Now they faced losing everything or entering into a marriage that would scandalize the territory. May I speak with Dakota alone? She asked quietly. Their visitors withdrew tactfully, leaving Sarah and Dakota in privacy. For a long moment, neither spoke. A marriage of convenience, Sarah finally said, testing the concept aloud. To protect the land. Is that all it would be? Dakota asked, his voice unusually soft. The question struck at the heart of what had been growing between them. A connection neither had fully acknowledged, constrained by cultural boundaries and practical concerns. I don't know, she answered honestly. What began as necessity has become something else. Dakota wheeled closer, taking her hands in his. In my tribe, marriage is not just words spoken. It is two spirits walking same path. And is that what we're doing? Walking the same path? 4 months now, he confirmed. But spirits must choose freely, not from fear. Sarah considered this wisdom. They're right about one thing. A legal marriage would strengthen our position considerably, but it would also make you a target even more than you already are. I have been target since birth, Dakota said with grim humor. Apache in white. Man's territory always walks with arrow aimed at back. This would be different, more personal. Yes. He looked down at their joined hands. Hers pale, his copper, both equally calloused from shared work. But worth risk, perhaps. For the land, Sarah asked, needing clarity. Dakota raised his eyes to hers. For the path we walk together. In that moment, understanding passed between them. An acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, transcending their disparate backgrounds and the circumstances that had thrown them together. Then let's give them something they don't expect, Sarah said, a new determination in her voice. A legal claim they can't easily dismiss. Outside, the day's final light cast long shadows across the homestead they had transformed together. The improved garden, the medicine shed, the repaired fences, From simple survival, they had built something of value, something worth fighting for. The marriage certificate bore their names in careful script: Sarah Elizabeth Winters and Dakota, no surname. Reverend Matthews had performed the ceremony at dawn, witnessed by Doc Wilson and Abigail, with former Marshal Reeves standing guard outside. Simple vows, no rings exchanged, a legal transaction by appearance, though the glances between bride and groom had suggested something deeper. Now, 2 hours later, Sarah stood before the town meeting in the settlement's church, the certificate clutched in her hand. Beside her, Dakota sat in his wheelchair, his posture regal despite the hostile murmurs rippling through the crowd. "This is an outrage," Mayor Blackwood sputtered, his face flushing crimson above his collar. "Reverend Matthews had no authority to perform such a mockery." "He has performed every other marriage in this settlement," Sarah countered steadily, "and filed this one with the territorial registrar, same as those." The mining company representative, Harrison, conferred urgently with the settlement's newly appointed marshal, a hard-faced man named Bryce, who had yet to speak, but whose hand rested conspicuously on his holstered pistol. "The territorial statutes contain no prohibition against such unions," Doc Wilson added, standing supportively beside Sarah. "I've examined them thoroughly." "This isn't about law, it's about decency," Jeremiah Cooper shouted from the crowd. "White woman marrying an Apache? It's against nature." "Seems to me," Abigail interjected, her normally soft voice carrying surprising authority, "that what's against nature is trying to steal a widow's rightful property through legal trickery." The accusation hung in the air, forcing Harrison to step forward. "Silverado Mining Company has made a generous offer for the Winters property, well above market value. We're simply ensuring all claims are properly established before proceeding with negotiations." "By challenging my right to my own land," Sarah demanded, "by claiming I abandoned improvements when anyone can see the condition of my homestead." "A condition achieved with inappropriate assistance," Harrison replied smoothly, nodding toward Dakota, "which raised legitimate questions about proper settlement maintenance." "Those questions are now resolved," Sarah said, holding up the marriage certificate. "My husband and I maintain the homestead together, legally and properly." The word husband caused another ripple of murmurs. Dakota, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "Land was Sarah's before our marriage," he said clearly. "Remains hers now. I claim no ownership, only right to help protect what is hers." It was a tactical statement, one they had discussed carefully, addressing fears that an Apache man might now control settler property, but it also held Dakota's genuine respect for what Sarah had built before him. Mayor Blackwood struggled visibly between his role as community leader and his obvious financial interest in the mining development. "The certificate will need verification," he managed finally. "Until then, this council cannot recognize such an irregular union." "Verification takes time," Marshal Bryce added, speaking for the first time, "during which the property's status remains uncertain." "Meaning you'll try to force us off the land before the verification returns," Sarah translated bluntly. "Meaning," Bryce countered, "that disturbing the peace or interfering with territorial development carries consequences. Mrs. Whatever your name is now." The threat was unmistakable. As the meeting dissolved into heated arguments, Sarah and Dakota withdrew, accompanied by their small circle of allies. "They won't give up," Reeves warned as they gathered outside. "That marriage certificate buys time, but they'll find another angle. Or create one," Doc Wilson added grimly. "Harrison was asking about Apache activity near your property. I suspect they're laying groundwork to claim hostile natives are using your homestead as a base, which would justify military intervention," Reeves concluded. Sarah felt cold, despite the morning sun. "They'd go that far? Risk people's lives over silver?" "Men have started wars for less," Dakota observed quietly. "Back at the homestead, they implemented the defensive preparations they'd planned, moving supplies to the root cellar, establishing observation points, reinforcing doors and windows. Takoda directed the work with a warrior's strategic mind, maximizing their limited resources. As Sarah secured the cabin's shutters, she noticed Takoda by the eastern slope, struggling to rise from his wheelchair. Her heart caught as he gripped a fence post and, through sheer determination, pulled himself upright. For 3 wavering steps, he stood and moved forward before his strength gave out. She rushed to his side, helping him back into the wheelchair. "You're walking," she whispered, incredulous. "Not well," he said, frustration and triumph mingled in his voice. "Not enough. It's a miracle you're walking at all. Not miracle. Your hands, my will." He looked toward the horizon, where dust suggested approaching riders. "Need more than walking now. Need plan." "We have one," Sarah reminded him. "The verification will come through. The law is weapon that changes hands." Takoda interrupted gently. "Mining men hold it now. Must fight differently." As if confirming his words, Doc Wilson arrived in his buggy, his expression grave. "Harrison's filed a formal complaint with territorial authorities. Claims Takoda is communicating with hostile Apache bands. The new marshal is forming a militia to secure the area." "That's absurd," Sarah protested. "The nearest Apache camp is 20 miles south, and they've made no hostile moves." "Truth doesn't matter now," Takoda said. "Story matters. Their story, dangerous Apache and misguided white woman, threaten settlement safety and progress." "And our story?" Sarah asked. Takoda's expression hardened with resolve. "Honorable warrior and brave widow defend what is rightfully theirs, against all odds." The warrior's bow rested across Takoda's lap, its curved shape formed from mountain juniper, sinew backing strengthening the arch. Maka, the elderly medicine man, had presented it in a solemn ceremony attended by a small delegation from Takoda's tribe. The gesture carried profound significance, a disabled warrior being honored with the symbol of his former strength. "They recognize you still as ND," Sarah observed, as the tribal visitors departed, melting into the landscape with practiced stealth. "More than warrior now," Takoda replied, fingers tracing the bow's curve. "Wisdom carrier, bridge builder." His eyes met hers. "Husband." The word still felt new between them, though they had been married for 10 days. Their union, begun as legal strategy, had settled into something genuine, if still evolving. They shared the cabin as before, but with subtle changes, hands held in quiet moments, conversations deepening beyond practicalities, the careful negotiation of physical boundaries given Takoda's ongoing recovery. "Do they understand what we're facing?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the departed Apache visitors. "Yes," Maka says tribal council discussed. They offer alliance. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Alliance? With settlers?" "With you," Takoda corrected. "With me, with Doc Wilson and others who have shown respect." He adjusted the bow across his lap. "Apache understand honor crosses boundaries. They will protect their silver place." This unexpected development shifted their defensive calculations significantly. What had seemed an impossible stand against overwhelming force now held a glimmer of hope. That afternoon brought another unexpected ally, the weather-beaten foreman from the Carson Ranch, a gruff man named Ellis, who had benefited from their medicines when a rattlesnake had struck his prized horse. "Mrs. Winters," he nodded respectfully, then with equal courtesy, "Mr. Takoda, Carson sent me, says he owes you for saving Thunder's leg." "No debt between neighbors helping each other," Sarah replied, offering coffee. Ellis accepted the cup, but remained standing, uncomfortable but determined. "Carson heard what's brewing. Mining company men been recruiting, offering $20 to anyone willing to wear a deputy's badge for a day or two. Special operation, they're calling it." "Against us," Takoda stated flatly. Ellis nodded. "Marshal, Bryce claims he's got evidence of Apache signals from your property." planning to move within 3 days. That's not much time, Sarah said, meeting Dakota's eyes. Carson says you've got friends you might not know about. Folks who remember who had medicines when the influenza hit last winter. Who warned about Apache hunting grounds and prevented bloodshed. Ellis set down his cup. He's sending 3 men tomorrow, good with rifles, discreet. After he left, Sarah and Dakota absorbed this unexpected development. The settlement isn't as united behind the mining company as they'd like to believe, she mused. People remember who stands by them, Dakota agreed. Medicine creates strong bonds. Their defensive preparations accelerated with these new alliances. Apache scouts established a perimeter warning system around the homestead, while ranchers' sons and a few sympathetic settlers positioned themselves as a second defensive line. Doc Wilson smuggled additional ammunition and supplies, while Abigail gathered intelligence from town. Dakota coordinated these disparate forces with remarkable skill, directing operations from his wheelchair or increasingly often using crutches to stand for short periods. His military experience as a scout, combined with Apache guerrilla tactics, created a defensive strategy that maximized their limited resources. They expect frontal assault against weak opponents, he explained, sketching positions in the dirt. We'll find prepared defense with depth. On the eve of the expected confrontation, Sarah found Dakota outside, practicing with his bow. Though seated in his wheelchair, his upper body strength allowed him to draw the weapon fully, a feat that would have been impossible months earlier. His arrows consistently found their target, a hay bale 40 yards distant. I never asked if you killed men, Sarah said quietly, watching his practiced movements. As a scout. Yes, Dakota answered simply. In battle, never for pleasure. And now, his hands stilled on the bow. Now I fight for home, for what we built. He looked up at her. For you. The simple declaration hung in the night air between them. Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his free hand in hers. When this began, she said, you were a burden, dropped on my doorstep as a cruel joke. Now you're the center of everything I hope to preserve. And you, Dakota replied, were enemy captor. Now, he seemed to search for adequate words in his still developing English. Finally, he simply brought her hand to his heart, the gesture conveying what language could not. Under the vast Arizona sky, they held each other's gaze, acknowledging the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from reluctant caregiver and unwilling patient to partners facing a common threat, bound by something neither had anticipated. Whatever comes tomorrow, Sarah whispered, we face it as we have faced everything. Together, Dakota finished, the word carrying the weight of a vow. Inside the cabin, the marriage certificate lay beside Dakota's medicine pouch and Sarah's father's watch, artifacts of separate pasts now woven into a shared present. Outside, their unlikely alliance of Apache warriors and frontier settlers maintained vigilant watch, united by respect for the extraordinary pair at the center of the coming storm. Sarah's fingers curled around Thomas's old Springfield rifle, the smooth walnut stock worn from years of use. She had cleaned and loaded it the previous night, hands steady, despite the knowledge of what dawn would bring. Now, as first light crept across the eastern horizon, she took position at the cabin's front window, the weapon a tangible connection to the husband who had taught her to shoot, but whose bullets she'd never fired in anger. Riders, came Dakota's low voice from the side window. Northern approach, 7 men, Bryce in lead. Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. Their allies were positioned according to Dakota's strategic plan. Apache scouts concealed in the surrounding landscape. Carson's ranch hands and sympathetic settlers forming a second defensive ring. Doc Wilson and Abigail maintaining a neutral position near the road, ostensibly as medical support, but ready to bear witness to whatever unfolded. Remember, Dakota said calmly, warning shots only, above heads, force parley, not blood. The approaching riders slowed as they detected the unusual stillness around the homestead. No birds calling, no normal morning movements. Marshal Bryce raised his hand, halting his makeshift posse 100 yards from the cabin. "Mrs. Winters," he called, "by authority of the territorial government, I'm here to investigate reports of illegal activity and Apache collaboration." Sarah glanced at Dakota, who nodded. She opened the window slightly. "There's no illegal activity here, Marshal, just a legal homestead with legal owners." "That remains to be determined," Bryce shouted back. "I have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of signaling to hostile Apache bands." "The only Apache here is my husband," Sarah replied firmly, "and we are prepared to defend our property against unlawful intrusion." Bryce conferred with his men, clearly not expecting resistance. Among his posse, Sarah recognized 2 of Cooper's friends, several drifters from town, and Harrison, the mining company representative, inappropriately armed for what was supposedly a law enforcement action. "I am ordering you to stand down," Bryce called, his hand moving to his holstered pistol. "Interference with a territorial marshal is a serious offense." Instead of Sarah's response, a single arrow thudded into the ground directly before Bryce's horse, causing the animal to rear in surprise. From the surrounding landscape came the distinctive sounds of rifles being cocked, Carson's men making their presence known. "You're surrounded, Marshal," Dakota called, his voice carrying surprising authority. "This is not Marshal's business. This is mining company's greed." Confusion spread through the posse as they realized the seemingly defenseless homestead had unexpected protection. Harrison pushed his horse forward. "This is absurd. Marshal, do your duty." Bryce hesitated, assessing the changed tactical situation. "How many are supporting you, Winters?" he called. "Enough," Sarah answered simply. "Apache warriors who respect my husband. Settlers who remember who provided medicines when the fever struck. Ranchers who value honest neighbors over corporate interests." "This is insurrection," Harrison sputtered. "This is community," came a new voice. Former Marshal Reeves rode into view from the eastern approach, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in an official uniform. "And legal intervention," the newcomer urged his horse forward. "I'm Judge Thomas Holbrook, Territorial Circuit Court. I've received concerning reports about improper enforcement actions and corporate interference in homestead claims." Bryce's face paled. "Sir, I was simply investigating a married couple's legal homestead based on unsubstantiated claims provided by mining interests," the judge finished dryly. "Without proper evidence or procedure." He held up a document. "I have here an injunction against any action regarding the Winters homestead pending full legal review." The confrontation's momentum shifted dramatically. Harrison began a heated protest, but fell silent when Judge Holbrook fixed him with a stern gaze. "Mr. Harrison, Silverado Mining Company's methods have attracted attention in territorial offices. There are questions about claim jumping, intimidation, and improper influence on law enforcement." He turned to Bryce. "Marshal, you would be wise to reconsider your associations." As the standoff de-escalated, Sarah allowed herself a shaky breath. Beside her, Dakota reached for her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. The judge dismounted, approaching the cabin with Reeves at his side. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Dakota," he called. "I'd appreciate a word if you're amenable." Sarah opened the door, rifle still in hand but lowered. The judge regarded them with open curiosity. The white settler woman and her Apache husband, an unprecedented union in territorial experience. "Your marriage certificate appears to be in order," he said without preamble. "Unusual but legal. Your homestead claim is substantiated by continuous occupation and improvement. The mining company's challenges are without merit." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet," Holbrook cautioned. "This injunction provides temporary protection. The full legal battle may be lengthy." "We have time," Dakota said confidently. "And truth. Beyond the Homestead's boundaries, the standoff continued to dissolve. Bryce and his posse retreated under the judge's stern observation, while Harrison remained, his expression darkening with frustrated rage. "This isn't over," he called toward the cabin. "Silver finds a way, always. So does justice," Reeves countered, "if good people stand together." As the mining representatives departed, the homestead's hidden defenders began to emerge. Apache, warriors nodding respectfully to Dakota, ranch hands tipping hats to Sarah, settlers acknowledging both with newfound respect. What had begun as a desperate defense had transformed into a remarkable alliance, bridging divides that had seemed insurmountable. Judge Holbrook watched this unusual gathering with evident fascination. "In 20 years on the territorial bench, I've never witnessed anything quite like this," he admitted. "An Apache man and a settler woman, defended by both their peoples. The beginning of something new, perhaps," Doc Wilson suggested, joining them with Abigail. "Or very old," Dakota said quietly, "before hatred taught by fear." 1 year later, the new sign stood proudly at the entrance to their homestead. Winter's Dakota Farm, burned into polished cedar. The lettering a blend of Western script and subtle Apache symbols. Sarah adjusted it slightly, ensuring it hung perfectly. "From the stone and timber gateway they'd constructed during the summer, what do you think?" she asked, stepping back to admire their work. Dakota approached on his walking staff, his gait still uneven but steady, a far cry from the paralyzed warrior dumped on her doorstep 18 months earlier. He studied the sign with thoughtful eyes. Good name, he decided. Good place. The homestead had transformed beyond recognition. The once struggling garden now flourished with both traditional crops and medicinal plants. The irrigation system, combining Thomas's engineering with Dakota's desert wisdom, channeled precious water with remarkable efficiency. The newly constructed medicine lodge stood adjacent to the expanded cabin, where they prepared remedies now, sought throughout the territory. Their legal victory had come 3 months after the confrontation. Judge Holbrook had not only confirmed their homestead rights, but established a precedent regarding intermarriage and property claims that territorial authorities reluctantly acknowledged. The Silverado Mining Company, exposed for corrupt practices in multiple settlements, had withdrawn from the region entirely. More meaningful than the legal victory was the gradual acceptance they'd earned. What began as reluctant tolerance from the settlement had evolved into genuine respect. Their medicine business thrived, drawing visitors from as far as Tucson. Dakota's reputation as the seated scout had evolved. He was now known as Pride of the Territory, a name first used by Judge Holbrook in his written opinion and quickly adopted by admirers. Sarah watched as Dakota made his way toward the ridge that marked their eastern boundary, where a small stone marker honored Thomas's memory. She followed at a respectful distance, observing as Dakota placed a bundle of sage and eagle feathers beside the stone, an Apache blessing for a man he'd never met, but whose legacy he honored. "He would be proud," Sarah said as she joined him, "of what we've built here." "Yes," Dakota agreed simply. "Good man plants seeds for trees he will never sit beneath." The philosophical observation was typical of Dakota's growing comfort with English, which now extended to reading and writing with remarkable proficiency. In turn, Sarah had learned enough Apache to converse with the tribal elders who regularly visited, establishing a unique cultural exchange that bridged ancient divisions. "Lieutenant Davis arrives tomorrow," she reminded him as they walked back toward the cabin, "with another delegation from territorial headquarters." Dakota nodded. "Many questions about our methods." The territorial government had taken interest in their unusual success, particularly in how they'd established peaceful cooperation between settler and Apache communities. Davis, promoted to captain after exposing military corruption linked to mining interests, had become their staunch advocate in official circles. Inside the cabin, Sarah retrieved her grandmother's journal from its honored place on the shelf, now accompanied by a second volume, their own compilation of healing knowledge that merged European and Apache traditions. Together, they had documented treatment methods, plant identifications, and successful applications that honored both cultural approaches while creating something new. Abigail says 3 more families asked for our fever treatment, Sarah noted, reviewing recent orders, and the ranch south of Carson's wants the wound salve for their cattle. Need more sagebrush, Dakota replied practically. We'll gather tomorrow. The domestic rhythm of their conversation belied the extraordinary nature of their partnership. What had begun as reluctant caregiver and unwilling patient had evolved into a union that defied convention, yet somehow embodied the frontier's true promise, different worlds finding common ground through respect and shared purpose. As evening settled over the homestead, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. Sarah's hand found Dakota's, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. Sometimes I think about that first day, she mused, when Cooper and his friends thought they were playing a cruel joke. Great spirits have sense of humor, Dakota observed, his rare smile appearing. Turn cruel joke into good medicine. Sarah nodded, considering the unlikely path that had brought them here. Do you ever regret it? Being brought to a widow's failing homestead instead of returning to your people? Dakota was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful as he scanned their thriving farm. Apache visitors talking with settler neighbors near the medicine lodge. The prosperous fields that blended farming techniques from both worlds. The cabin where they had created a life neither could have imagined. No regrets, he said finally. Found new path, better than old. As darkness gathered, they remained on the porch, 2 worlds merged into one beneath the vast Arizona sky. On the table beside them lay her grandmother's journal, open to a blank page where they would record new discoveries, not just about healing plants, but about the more profound medicine of bridging worlds once thought forever divided. Tomorrow, Sarah said, not a question but a shared certainty. Tomorrow, Dakota agreed, his hand tightening around hers, and many tomorrows after.